Some people never learn until the day they wish they had. John Whitmore was 20 years old, tall, lanky, and far too sure of himself. He had plenty of flaws: lazy mornings, late nights, a habit of ignoring chores, but there was one habit that made his grandfather absolutely furious. Whenever nature called, John often chose the quickest, laziest route possible, and that meant stepping into the back garden and relieving himself right there in the yard. But to Arthur Whitmore, his 70-year-old grandfather, it was an act of utter disrespect. Not just to the home, but to the family name. Arthur had warned John countless times. "John," he'd say, in that deep, steady voice, "if I catch you doing that again, you'll regret it." But John, he'd just grin, nod, and carry on as if the old man's words were nothing more than background noise. It was a crisp Saturday morning in early autumn. The Whitmore garden was glistening with dew, and the old oak tree at the corner swayed gently in the breeze. Inside the house, Arthur Whitmore sat at the kitchen table, sipping his strong black tea and reading the morning paper. John, meanwhile, had just woken up. Hair messy, eyes still half shut, he shuffled down the hallway in his slippers. The bathroom was occupied. His mother was in there, singing softly as she showered, and John, as always, wasn't in the mood to wait, so he glanced out of the window. The back garden looked quiet, peaceful, and temptingly close. With a lazy shrug, he pushed open the back door and stepped outside. He headed to his usual spot by the hedge, zipped down, and began relieving himself. What John didn't realize was that Arthur had already folded his newspaper and was now staring right through the kitchen window at him. The old man's jaw tightened. Without a word, Arthur stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and reached for the polished oak paddle that hung on the wall. The sound of the paddle's handle knocking against the table made John's stomach twist. He froze mid-act, glancing over his shoulder. Arthur was already walking towards him across the grass, each step slow and deliberate. This wasn't going to be another lecture. John zipped up in a hurry, but the damage was done both literally and figuratively. Arthur Whitmore stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locked on his grandson. There was no shouting, no theatrical speech, just that cold, steady stare that told John he had crossed the final line. "I've told you, John, time and time again," Arthur said slowly, each word heavy enough to crush any excuse. "Granddad, John started, forcing out a half-smile, hoping to pass it off as a harmless mistake. "It's just the garden. No one—" "Enough," Arthur snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "You are 20 years old, not some wild animal marking its territory." John's smirk faded. He could tell this wasn't one of those moments where Arthur would grumble and walk away. The man's grip on the paddle was firm, his knuckles pale. "You think my words are optional?" Arthur asked, stepping closer. "You've ignored my warnings for the last time, boy." John swallowed hard. He wanted to joke, to deflect, but something about his grandfather's tone stopped him. The neighbors' windows were open. A few birds had gone silent. It felt like the entire world was watching. Arthur pointed to the garden bench. "Over there, now." John hesitated, glancing toward the back door as if escape were an option. But one look at Arthur told him there was no running from this. John shuffled towards the garden bench, each step feeling heavier than the last. The morning air suddenly felt colder, the smell of damp grass sharp in his nose. Arthur followed, his cane-straight posture and slow, deliberate pace making the moment even more nerve-wracking. "Bend over," Arthur ordered, his voice calm, too calm. John hesitated, glancing back. "Granddad, Come on, I'm not a kid anymore. Arthur's eyes narrowed. No, you're a young man who thinks rules don't apply to him, and that's worse. With a sigh that came more from embarrassment than regret, John bent forward over the bench. His hands gripped the edge, knuckles turning white. He could feel his heart thudding in his ears. The first crack of the paddle echoed through the yard, sharp and unforgiving. John jerked forward with a grunt, the sting spreading fast across him. "That's for ignoring me the first time," Arthur said evenly. The second swat landed harder. Crack! And John clenched his teeth. His cheeks flushed, partly from pain, partly from the thought that the neighbors could hear every single strike. "That's for thinking my rules are a joke," Arthur continued. By the third strike, John's pride was starting to crumble. The wooden paddle had a bite to it that no lecture ever carried. His breath quickened, but Arthur wasn't done. The fourth swat came, then a fifth, each one followed by a pause, as if giving John a moment to reflect and making him dread the next. Finally, Arthur stepped back. "Stand up," he said. John straightened slowly, rubbing the soreness, unable to meet his growl.